Okay.
Testing, testing. One, two, three. This is Claudia on the English channel.
Claudia, gracias. Pasamos a español, por favor. Sí. Bien. Bien, ambas. Gracias.
Presentation.
Yes, I was. Uh,
here in the room and as well as in the virtual world, I think in Jamaica and anywhere else where you may be. I now open hearing number 25 of the 188th period of sessions of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, which is entitled Human Rights of People Deprived of Liberty in Jamaica. This is an ex officio hearing in the sense that it's the hearing that has been formulated and requested by the Commission itself. My name is Roberta Clark, and I'm the second Vice President of the Commission and also the Country Rapporteur for Jamaica. And I'm accompanied to my right by Commissioner Jose Luis Caballero, who is also the Rapporteur for Human Rights Defenders. And thank you for being here, Commissioner. I'm also here with the Special Rapporteur on Economic, Social, Cultural, and Environmental Rights, Mr. Javier Palumo, who is, I want to say, a new rapporteur, but maybe he's been here at least a month now. 2 months. 2 months now, so maybe not so new. Welcome, Javier. And to my furthest right, Mr. Jorge Mesa, who is the Deputy Executive Secretary of the Commission. The objective of this hearing is to present information regarding human rights of persons deprived of liberty. And for us at the Commission, the ex officio hearing will further our efforts to make visible experiences, challenges, as well as achievements. Well, I should say experiences and challenges that persons deprived of liberty face in the recognition and exercise of their rights in Jamaica and in extension, of course, the Americas and the Caribbean, to the extent that that experience is shared. And it's also an opportunity to get information on any good practices in addressing the question of redressing and ensuring rights of persons deprived of liberty. I want to also explain that today, there will be no representative of the state. The state won't be appearing at this hearing. As you recall, in July, we were requested by the state to postpone the hearing so that they would have a sufficient opportunity to get information on the hearing and to prepare. And we also received a communication 2 days ago indicating that the state would not attend this hearing. So with that, I would like to say how we're going to spend our time together. The hearing is typically an hour and a half long, but we expect that we may complete within an hour and 15 minutes because the state is not here. So we start off by giving the civil society, you have 40 minutes to present, and then the commission has 20 minutes, up to 20 minutes to make comments or ask questions for clarification. And then the civil society has another opportunity to respond to what the commissioner said and to amplify what it wishes to say, including any recommendations you wish to make, and then we close. So with that, I want to invite civil society to take the floor and also to introduce yourself. We have time, so please don't speak too quickly, don't be rushed, and also recognize that there is interpretation, so the interpreters have to keep up with us. So over to you, civil society, and please do introduce yourselves as you start.
Good morning. My name is Carla Bullotta. I am the Executive Director of Stand Up for Jamaica. And we really want to thank you for this opportunity to share with you our experience. Stand Up for Jamaica is a human rights NGO. And among the projects, the biggest projects that we have is at Correctional Services, where we work since 2007, promoting rehabilitation and reintegration and running an amount of programs, which are education, professional skill, and psychological health, to try to use the serving time as time. It's a time along that people can learn to be different, create a different mindset, and leave the institutions with some opportunities. my task is to give you some numbers. So let me start with the numbers. The correctional services in Jamaica have a population of roughly 4,000 inmates. There are 11 correctional institutions and only 2 are female, 1 for adults and 1 for girls, juvenile. The other ones are all males, 3 are high risk inmates, and the other ones are mild or middle risk. The population of the institution are heavily overcrowded, apart the 2 females. The female institution, the adult female institution, has an average between 120 and 140 males. Obviously, numbers are flexible and can fluctuate. The juvenile institution, the girls, has actually 76 girls. There are 2 institutions for male juveniles, and altogether have a population of around 320 boys. The institutions are heavily overcrowded, especially 2. Tower Street General Penitentiary, which is a high security one, has been built and thought for 800 inmates, and there is a population of over 1,700. St. Catherine Institution in Spanish Town was built for 600 inmates, and actually there are around 1,000. Infrastructures are very poor. Health hazard is a daily thing. We have been using this opportunity as a human rights group to promote rehabilitation, because I think that is one of the key elements to fight crime and violence. Going back to numbers, according to the report from DCS, out of 3 people living in an institution, 1 is coming back, so is a reoffender. Among the numbers of those which are on rehabilitation, basically there is almost nobody. In 5 years, we had 6 coming back, which means it works. It means that a second chance is possible. It means also that if you invest in rehabilitation, you invest in reducing crime rate, because you send back to families and society people which are able to stay far from a crime life. Still with the numbers, we have to admit the rehabilitation is not involved the majority of the population. Just to give an example, in Tower Street, where the population is 1,700, at school we have around 300 inmates. Reason why is the poor infrastructure, which cannot hold all those which are willing to be part of rehabilitation. Most of the people are applying to be part of it, but we are compelled not to take them in because we don't have space for them, which is really sad. Rehabilitation projects have scored some huge success. Last year, the CXC exams, we have the schools which are going from remedial level to CXC. And last year, the CXC scores were 76, which is very high. We also have a pilot project with the University of Commonwealth Caribbean, which is granting a degree. Our pilot project of 5 has placed our 5 among the best 25 ones in a batch of 690 students. And the other ones were obviously out of the institution, therefore they were in a different environment. Such success has encouraged us to increase the project, and actually we have 11 which are following the following batch, and all of them were excellent marks and excellent results in the first year of the classes, which are lasting 2 years. While those which have finished the first degree have been asking and applied to continue to achieve the full mastery. I think that these elements are extremely important because they give you the feeling that what you do is on the right path. We try to verify our projects every 6 months to see how best we can implement, but also how best we are able to make changes when we see that something needed to be addressed. The second element which I need to mention is the professional lab. 82% of the inmates, incarcerated people, do not have any skill, not only in terms of school, but in terms of professional skill. Therefore, our efforts are going towards providing them with skills at different levels. We have some basic ones like welding or tailoring, but we have high quality ones because we have been opening computer labs in all the institutions where they can learn how to use a computer, how to become a computer engineer, how to repair a computer, how to do graphics, how to do data entry classes. And we work in a partnership with the Heart Foundation because the foundation is not only able to provide trainers, but is able to provide diploma, which is the most important thing. One of the most outstanding lab is a music lab. I mention it because it's quite unusual, but Jamaicans are very talented for music, etc. So we open an opportunity to have something a little different from what is habitual, and we have been graduating people learning to play an instrument, but also becoming sound engineer, sound technician, backstage technician, which is something which is instrumental to provide them with a job. The last element that you see on the screen is entrepreneurship. I want to explain why we decided to develop that aspect of the program. Those which are living in the institution well rehabilitated have some expectations to get a job, an opportunity. The main problem is that wherever they apply for a job, once they learn where they're coming from, stigma is very high. Therefore, their application are refused. I also need to remind everybody that in Jamaica, none of the governmental agencies is allowed to employ an ex-inmate. It is really something which should be addressed, especially Ministry of Security, because Ministry of Security, which is the leader for the correctional services and is officially formally promoting rehabilitation, should be on the front line to promote the fact that somebody which has been an offender could be employed in a governmental agency. Saying that, it is obvious why we are promoting entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship is a way to teach them something that they can do on their own, so they won't be in need to apply for a job. I just want to give an example. Cosmetology for the women is popular. They learn a skill, they learn something they can do from home, they learn something they can do in their communities, and they learn also not only the professional skill, how to do cosmetology, but we provide them with principle of business, which means how to manage your business in a proper way in order to know income, outcome, invoices, and all of that. Actually, today, we are starting two of the projects on cosmetology in two areas, one in Portland and one in Kingston, where we have ex-inmates and abused women. We hope that this is a key to bypass the problem that stigma is so high that most of them do not get a job. I think this is a key point which I really want to stress today, because is rehabilitation has sense and makes sense as far as we are able to give them a second chance. So rehabilitation and reintegration are going together hand in hand. If we do not provide reintegration, basically, it doesn't make much sense to work on rehabilitation, and we need to be aware that we can push them back to the same life that we are trying to change for them. In order to do that, also, we have psychological assistance and we have specific programs with various teams. We try to work a lot on self-awareness and self-control. Some might be habitual delinquents, but there is quite an amount of those which have been committing violent crimes, which they did it because they lost control. They were drunk, they were under drugs, they were jealous. And we have been working on that specifically to teach them to control their emotional side. And the other thing that we have to do, and is a priority for us, working on the impact of rehabilitation also is admitting that you have been doing something wrong, which is have been affecting your life, but also heavily affecting the life of those which are victims of their crimes. There is no rehabilitation unless there is the truth and the fact that you admit about some wrongdoing. We have specific classes on that matter of psychological assistance, one for women and one for girls. For women, we realized how difficult it is for them sometimes to focus on the programs. So we were trying to verify why they are producing less than men. And after we had some sessions which are brought to light the fact that all of them have children, the wide majority, and they do not know what's happening to their children, if somebody is taking care of them, send them to school, buy them books and shoes. Therefore, are so stressed and anxious, they cannot focus sometimes. And secondly, at correctional services, mothers are not allowed to see children often. The family day is twice per year, and that is not acceptable because it is completely affecting the relationship between mother and child. So we are proposing that those communication between mother and children are much more often. Juveniles are children which are detained. In Jamaica, children which are called uncontrollable can be detained. Uncontrollable means unruly behavior. After 5 years of lobby, finally the uncontrollable children have been abolished as those which should be in conflict with the law. They need help. But they have been regularly detained, and usually the average of them is 80% of the population of the female institution. Those children are heavily traumatized, extremely emotional, they're not mature, and being incarcerated is increasing the level of trauma and won't allow them to grow as a balanced person. So we have some special programs for them where we try not only to do counseling, but also to improve and showcase their talents, because their self-esteem is below zero. So we try to tell them that they are beautiful, they have a value, they are able to do things. And every year we showcase what they learn to the families, trying to teach the parent that they should not have sent that child to a penal institution. The trauma is very high, and also unluckily we still have this habit to put children in isolation if they do something wrong. It should not be permitted. To lock a child in isolation for 2 weeks is totally compromising all the work which has been done with her, and totally compromising her capability to maintain a sort of control. They are very violent, they're very aggressive, they're very frustrated, and all the work which has done before has basically been cancelled. Last element which I want to put on the table, because I know that I cannot talk too long, is gender-based violence. Gender-based violence is affecting men and women which are incarcerated. Most of the women, quite an amount of them, have been committing a crime as a reaction to years of abuses. Therefore, we have a problem with them because they feel that they are the victims of abuses. Just an example, 6 months ago, a lady which has been abused by her husband for years, been beaten up, house break, car burns down, the man was entering through the windows in the night, finally decided to break up with him. The gentleman came into the house in the night, broke the window, attacked her, she self-defense herself and killed him. She got life sentence. I don't say that she should have killed him, but I cannot accept the fact that she be sentenced to such a punishment. Men now, we are working on gender-based violence with men too, because if you do not change the mindset of the perpetrators and you only work with the victims, you won't be able to change the relationship. All of them are coming from environment where violence is a daily experience. That is affecting men, women, and minors. Families are monoparental, fathers are not there, children grow in the middle of the road, and the macho culture, the violence culture is deeply rooted. So trying to work with the men has been very interesting, and I think that we were not expecting such a positive reaction because they were telling us that they didn't know that there was another avenue. It's gonna be a long way to go. It's gonna be a very long way to go, but I think that we are determined to continue to do that, not only into the institution, but in the communities. Just to end up my presentation, I see on the screen that you see some of the little items that we produce with entrepreneurship. This is, for example, our jewels, as you can see, and it is another way to allow, especially women, to achieve a professional skill, and then we help them because at the end of the classes we provide them with some items that they can use to start their little business. We also try to help them to market it. So we have somebody which is a social worker, which is following them and try to see what they can sell, how they best they can do it. So if I have to finish as it looks like, and I would love to talk much more, I tell you the truth. First of all, rehabilitation is a key. Let me reiterate that. Secondly, if you do not link rehabilitation with reintegration, rehabilitation could be a failure as it is. We have people coming to our office after they are released with 6 subjects, a art diploma, a data diploma, an accountant diploma. Give them a second chance. It's the only way to keep them far from a crime life. Third, I want to just mention very shortly, if you allow me, that in the correctional institution there is a prison in the prison where there are detained the members of the LGBTQ community. In Jamaica, homosexuality is punished by law, and therefore the stigma is sky high. That means that those which are incarcerated for crimes related to that, which is called boundary law, are locked in a special block. They cannot be among the general population. This is affecting them for many reasons, but the major one is that they do not have access to rehabilitation projects. They cannot go to school, they cannot go to a professional lab. So we have been carrying the school into the special, we have been carrying a couple of professional labs into the special. It's not enough, but it's a way to do not cut any possibility for them to be still part of the rehabilitation project that we think and believe are a major instruments to fight crime in Jamaica. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gulata, and let's leave it with you to continue. Civil society organizations.
And many thanks, Carla, for providing an overview of the state of rehabilitation and reintegration in Jamaica. Hello, everyone. Thanks for this opportunity. I'm Dacia Leslie, board member of Stand Up for Jamaica, and allow me to now turn your attention to some specific challenges related to remand and the parole process in Jamaica. So on screen, you will see the bar chart showing that Jamaica overall has an occupancy rate of 82% for all 11 of its correctional facilities. But according to the latest available economic and social survey of Jamaica, you would have heard Carla allude to it. St. Catherine Adult Correctional Center is operating 200% above its capacity, and Tower Street 6.7%. So we know that at least two of the maximum facilities, they're overcrowded, right? Based on the available statistics. The implications of this are resource constraints, including insufficient staff and limited access to available rehabilitation services. Of course, the scarcity of resources hampers the effective implementation of rehabilitation initiatives. Figure 1 also shows that when compared to its Caribbean counterparts, Barbados, Trinidad and Tobago, St. Kitts and Nevis, Jamaica's pre-trial detention population seems moderately small. But when we disaggregate these figures, we see that 68% of the child custodial population are actually on remand. This represents an increase from 2020, when roughly 53% of children in custody were on remand. And of course, detaining children without a clear legal basis or without proper considerations of alternatives raises several human rights concerns. International standards emphasize the need to prioritize the best interests of the child, and of course, explore non-custodial measures. Not only do this kind of detention disrupt a child's education, particularly as it relates to mainstream schooling, but it has implications for mental health and their well-being with limited specialist support. As the current situation stands, no juvenile center or adult center has a residential psychologist. But what we have is a team of 2 full-time and 2 sessional psychologists, along with available interns and professional volunteers currently serving both the adult and the child custodial population. So there's a sense that that pretrial detention is being overused, especially with children in conflict with the law. And of course, this contradicts the provisions in international standards, including the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which Jamaica ratified, and which provides for the limited use of pretrial detention only when certain conditions are present. You would have heard Carla speak of the issue of uncontrollable children. Well, majority of children admitted into the care of the DCS in 2021 were for uncontrollable behavior or disorderly conduct. And of course, in 2013, a policy decision was actually taken to reduce the number of children sent to the DCS for behavioral challenges. And there was even consideration given to changing the approach. The government even went further in August 2013 to, make, allow cabinet to approve amendments to the Child Care and Protection Act, which removed the option of a correctional order for children deemed to be uncontrollable. But this amendment is still yet to take effect. So what we have is children, in need of supervision being unnecessarily criminalized when committed into the care of the DCS. Now, another issue was raised by the survey of persons deprived of liberty conducted by the Inter-American Development Bank in 2019, when the findings revealed that of the roughly 720 persons interviewed, 53.7% reported that they were not informed of their right to legal representation, and 59.1% reported that they did not give a preliminary statement in the presence of a justice or an attorney. This is in violation of Article 14.3b of the ICCPR, which clearly states that everyone charged with a criminal offense has the right to legal assistance of their choosing. And if, of course, a person cannot afford legal assistance, they're entitled to have legal aid assigned to them when the interests of justice require it. In terms of Section 14 of the Jamaican Constitution, there is, the provision that no person shall be deprived of his liberty except in accordance with fair procedures established by law. However, inmates have been deprived of this procedural right by the parole process, which they are qualified for once they serve at least 1/3 of their sentence of more than 12 months. In 2022, 122 parole applications were submitted to the parole board for consideration, but only 52.5% were granted and 41.8% refused. Of course, parole is granted to enable inmates to be released into open society for readjustment with the guidance of a probation officer. But again, the DCS reports that there are just not enough parole officers, because currently the probation officer is working, that office is working 10.4% below the establishment of 182 officers. But the general overall process of parole lacks transparency. Research done by the Office of the Public Defender found that one of the reasons often given for the refusal of a parole application was that the board in its deliberation recommends that the applicant spend additional time in the institution to benefit from rehabilitation activities, but further investigations conducted and several studies have indicated that there are few rehabilitation activities in operation, and if and when they are available, they're not always accessible to all. So on this basis, the reason for refusal might seem unfair, and is something that we definitely will need to look into further. There's also the question or the issue of whether or not inmates' right to a fair hearing is being breached, as outlined by Section 16.2 of the Constitution. And we see that in the case of where various reports are gathered about the applicant and made available to the parole board in accordance with the Parole Act. But these documents, which are collected and used in the decision-making process, are not disclosed to the applicant. As such, it's difficult for the applicant to contest the reports, which may contain information which he or she may consider prejudicial to his application. And so there's also the consideration of not knowing when a decision or how long the application process will take, or when a decision will be made. Section 7.5 of the Parole Act gives the parole board the power to invite an applicant for parole to be present at the hearing. But in a number of reports and a number of research studies suggest that this power is not being utilized, at least not to the full extent, because in a number of cases, applicants were not invited to attend the hearings. And so these are some of the challenges that we face with parole. how we deal with this, we can make a number of recommendations. I'd like to highlight three. In support of the Office of the Public Defender's recommendation, we also agree that reports gathered about parole applicants must be disclosed to him or her at least 14 days before the hearing, so that he or his representative can have an opportunity to challenge any adverse material contained therein, right? Secondly, measures and resources need to be put in place to ensure total compliance with the Child Care and Protection Act, the Beijing Rules, and the Conventions on the Rights of the Child as ratified by Jamaica. And lastly, the prison sentence, based on the number of children in remand, 63% is just too much. So the prison sentence must, in all cases, be used as an absolute last resort, especially for vulnerable persons. And with that said, I'll hand over to Daniel.
Thank you, Tasia. All right, so I will be talking about the situation regarding mentally ill in correctional centers in Jamaica. Thanks again for the opportunity to be able to share some of Stand Up for Jamaica's findings and work. So I wanted to talk a little about what the current situation is. And I have some figures on the screen. In 2020, INDECOM, the Independent Commission, released a report with some damaging statistics regarding the situation of mentally ill inmates. And one of the, I think, driving or motivating factors in producing that report had to do with the death of a man called Noel Chambers, who died in prison at the age of 81 years old, and he had been detained since 1980 for 40 years. 40 years at the Governor General's pleasure. He was unfit to plead a charge of murder, so he was being held in custody without a trial for those 40 years. When he was found in his cell. He was severely malnourished. The report says he was full of vermin bites and infected with bed bugs. They come in their report following that discovery and review, found that there were at least 146 mentally ill inmates who had been held without trial as at January 2020. In fact, of that amount, 15 of those persons were held for a period of over 30 years. One of the issues regarding why persons have, or the mentally ill have been held for such long periods of time have to do with severe challenges within the system in ensuring that such inmates are properly attended to by psychiatrists, that the proper reports are prepared by those psychiatrists, and that those reports are then sent to the courts, and that there is proper and due diligence in the follow-up and bringing those matters to court so that their detention can be reviewed. So in the case of Noel Chambers, it was found that at least twice had been certified by psychiatrists as plead in 2007 and 2008, but had never been actually brought to trial. There's a picture, and I apologize for the graphic nature of the photo. It was published online, published in the INDECOM report with the permission of his family, but it's just to highlight how the graphic nature and how important and severe the situation is regarding those who are mentally ill. Thank you. Can you go to the next slide?
All right, so there are some legislative hurdles regarding access to justice. So previously, those who were mentally ill, they were detained under law at the governor's pleasure. So this is the court's ability to order that such persons be detained if they're deemed unfit to plead. There was an amendment to the law, the Criminal Justice Administration Act of 2011, which now changed the status from inmates being held at governor's pleasure to being held at the court's pleasure. Now, what this has meant, and it introduced a whole procedure, which is really a procedural hurdle for persons who are being detained in order to change their status. It requires that an application has to be made to the court to change their status. So inevitably, those persons would need legal representation, legal services in order to do so. And that is in and of itself one of the challenges. The onus, of course, is on the mentally ill inmate to initiate that review, and there has to be a situation where they can be released in the custody of a caretaker or on conditions and subjected to further treatment. The judge, of course, has the discretion as to where an inmate is kept. So even though the legislation contemplates that inmates can be remanded or sent to a mentally ill center, there are currently no such places that are within the Department of Correctional Services control, and so inevitably they are sent to the prisons. The court can, of course, commit those inmates, and the court is not entitled to receive or rely on the opinion of a medical professional in making those orders. So it's within the court's complete discretion in terms of where to send those inmates. Next slide, please. So in a report, a brief that Stand Up for Jamaica commissioned with some assistance to some lawyers, it was discovered that there really is inhumane and degrading punishment and a breach of the right to personal liberty. So some constitutional breaches concerning this whole process of the detainment of mentally ill persons who are deemed unfit to plead. It was discovered that the Commissioner of Corrections is not sending routinely monthly reports to the Supreme Court as required, to the courts, which is required by Section 25B of the Act. And this is a process which allows the courts to assess continually what is the condition and status of the mentally ill. And the Registrar of the Supreme Court was not advising the court of whether these monthly reports were being sent. So without that process of routinely checking in on the status of these mentally ill persons, the court is kept out of the loop and matters are not brought before the court's attention. As I mentioned before, there's no psychiatric institution for mentally ill inmates, specifically under the Department of Correctional Services control, and so all inmates are therefore held in a regular prison with other inmates. Inmates are returned for long periods, irrespective of whether their mental condition has improved. So even where psychiatrists have, as I mentioned before, certified that persons have been fit to plead, they still remain in prison for long periods of time. And their detention in many of those cases exceeds any sentence that they were likely to have received if they were convicted. And of course, having been detained for such long periods of time, the result is that the case against them is no longer viable. I wanted to mention the case of, so since the INDECOM's report, Stand Up for Jamaica, well, prior to that, Stand Up for Jamaica was doing work on mentally ill, but since the INDECOM report, Stand Up for Jamaica has retained lawyers' assistance in trying to free some of those persons who have been detained for long periods of time. One such person was detained for 50 years without a trial, and he was released, finally released through the lawyers making an application, as I mentioned before, to the court in 2020. And in that case, the government offered compensation of only $6 million, irrespective of the fact that the man was detained for 50 years, for most of his working life, and is now elderly and unable to work and support himself. Prior to Stand Up for Jamaica in becoming involved in that matter, his last listed court date was in 1970. Next slide, please. So one of the things I wanted to talk about had to do with the recommendations, and this is my final slide. We think that there needs to be a comprehensive mental health care strategy with qualified and skilled mental health professionals. One of the situations that was highlighted by data is the fact that there are not enough psychiatrists that are servicing our prisons, so that needs to be addressed. One of our recommendations also is to establish a specialized mental health court to deal with this backlog, or focus specifically on dealing with those mentally ill that are detained, especially those who are detained without trial. There should be a special psychiatric facility that those persons could be committed to, as opposed to being held in the general population. And we think that there also should be some way to divert, at the point of arrest, to divert persons who are mentally ill, who do not pose a danger to society, so that they're not held, find themselves being held in prison, detained for long periods of time. I should mention that, and on that point, at least 2 of the 15 persons who had been held for over 30 years were held on non-violent charges like larceny and burglary. There should be special procedures, of course, for detaining and questioning mentally ill, given the nature or their nature. We have to recognize that they may not be mentally competent to respond to police officers who are trying to detain them and question them, and it's important that they have adequate support as well as legal representation. And then we need to improve the record keeping for those who are charged and sentenced, because the records show for many of these persons who are detained for long periods that there is not information about when they were last evaluated, what was done with the reports of evaluation, where they were sent to court, what is happening in the court system in relation to those persons. And so there's a need to improve that process. Thank you. That's it for me.
Thank you very much, representatives of Stand Up Jamaica. Are you finished your civil society presentation?
Yes, that's our final final points of our presentation.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we will turn to the representatives of the Commission, starting with Commissioner Jose Luis Caballero for his comments and questions. If you could have seen us at the distance across the virtual world, you would have seen we had a lot of expressions on our faces during this very in-depth presentation by the 3 of you. But Jose Luis, over to you.
Thank you. Muchas gracias, Presidenta.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Clark. My greetings to the other members of the table, our Special Rapporteur on Economic, Social, and Environmental Rights, as well as the Assistant Executive Secretary. Thank you to the representatives from civil society in Jamaica. Unfortunately, we very much regret that the state is not present here It's very discouraging when states do not take very seriously the activities of international organizations of which they are members, and to meet with civil society, particularly organized civil society. We have seen all of the efforts of you who are representing civil society in Jamaica. The efforts that you are engaged in to support those who so desperately need your help, particularly those who are in prison. In the report, we saw a recounting of findings of very complex situations. My question, however, is whether the state has taken note or has acted on any of your findings or those of others, about this prolonged pretrial detention, which is a point that you raised at length during today's hearing. Has the state done anything to try to reverse the situation of pretrial detention? This is something that the Inter-American Commission has paid special attention to in the case of Jamaica. Secondly, it would seem to be no, but I was wondering if there is any mechanism in place in Jamaica for quality defense free of charge. You told us about a person who was in prison for 40 years. And so I was wondering about the availability of quality legal defense free of charge. Those are my questions.
Commissioner, I turn over to Special Rapporteur for Economic, Social, Cultural, and Environmental Rights for your comments or questions.
Thank you very much, Madam President. My greetings to Commissioner Caballero and Assistant Executive Secretary for Petitions and Cases, Jorge Mesa. It truly is regrettable that there is no possibility of engaging in dialogue during this hearing because the state is not present. Looking at the very serious problems in Jamaica's correctional system, which have existed for many years, I think the last in-loco visit to Jamaica was in 2008, having to do with criminal justice. And this was one of the most concerning topics back then. It's very regrettable that these problems have persisted for so long. If you could please send my special rapporteurship all of the information that you have, all of the data having to do with access for persons who are deprived of liberty, that are in any way related to economic, cultural, social, and environmental rights. For example, mental health, the right to health, others. We will do monitoring and of these issues that you shared with us in so much detail. We will touch on them in our annual report. We will take this into account, and we're hoping that in the near future we can have constructive dialogue with the Jamaican authorities as well. Thank you. I too would like to extend my greetings to everyone here at the head table. I would like to thank civil society for your contributions. This information is very important, particularly for the monitoring section. It's important to receive this information. This helps the commission to have context that it will help it to take positions on certain matters. I have a question. I don't know if I heard this well. There were some sound issues. I was wondering if you were talking about the fact that the government cannot hire people who have previously been imprisoned. Is that something that is established by law? Is it a regulation? And then when we're talking about pretrial detention, the problems of overcrowding, and you shared some concerning statistics about young people and people with mental illness. I was wondering, in the process, is it all about, is the pretrial detention about the fears that somebody will not return for their court cases? What are the reasons behind that?
Thank you very much. And I just want to join my fellow commission team in thanking you for this very thoughtful and pretty evidence-based presentation. Criminal justice reform is a big issue in the Caribbean now, and has been for quite a while, particularly given the uptick in the levels of violence and insecurity and crime. We find the courts seem pretty overburdened by the demands on them, so they're some of the jurisdictions, quite long periods of pretrial detention and long periods of persons also on bail awaiting trial. It's a big issue. I think we look to the justice sector for the solution to some of these issues, and of course the justice sector has to be part of the solution, an integral part of the solution. But it's really important that we maybe think about the social and economic determinants of this issue. And I very much appreciated the opening presentation, the statistic that we got, because I think it's a kind of a key to figuring out how we approach this problem. I think Maria Carla, you spoke about 82% of the persons who are incarcerated have no skills. And that's, I think we know from a series of studies either done through the UN or the Inter-American Development Bank, that the majority of those who are incarcerated either pre-trial or post-conviction are persons who have very few skills, very little certification, and not really, or may have had very precarious, low skill levels of employment, and oftentimes in the informal sector. So this is a vulnerable population, vulnerable because of socioeconomic background and perhaps living in intergenerational poverty. And they enter a prison system that has to think about how it can rehabilitate. In other words, you can't leave incarceration worse off than when you entered, or you've not served the purpose of incarceration, which is partly about personal accountability, but also about rehabilitation. So I very much like the focus of Stand Up Jamaica on rehabilitation. And I understand that you are doing some rehabilitation services, so you have some access to those who are incarcerated, either children, adults, or maybe even the mentally ill. So one of my questions is, what is the state, if you know it, what is the state's approach to rehabilitation across the life cycle of those who are incarcerated? And then on the question of children, everyone mentioned the question of the population of children who are incarcerated, which seems quite high. But it's a mixture of children who are in conflict with the law in the sense of may have committed crimes or have been charged with crimes, criminal offenses. So there's that group of children, and it'd be interesting to know what is the age group there. How young do those children get who are incarcerated on in a pretrial detention scenario? So there are those, and then there are those children who are detained because they are uncontrollable. And in relation to this question of uncontrollability, which is also, I think, an issue in other Caribbean countries, who defines what is uncontrollable, and how is that? What is the evidence of that? And are children sent to detention centers for being uncontrollable further to a court process, or in which social services are involved? What is that process of determining uncontrollability? How do those children come before court, and what is that process? And what is the, if you know it, what is the average duration of detention for uncontrollability? And are these two populations mixed? I guess is also a question that I'm interested in. And in relation to the those who are mentally ill, I thank you very much for really quite comprehensive points on this issue. You did say that some persons are in detention, pre-trial, found unfit to plead, not necessarily by a mental health professional, and may be incarcerated for even periods much longer than the maximum sentence for the crime that they may have been committed, they may have committed and could be convicted of. So my question on that is, are there efforts afoot at a reform, at a closer look at how those who are mentally ill are treated in the criminal justice system? And then finally, Stand Up Jamaica, like other organizations in Jamaica who are focused on the administration of justice, are you all involved with state agencies to bring your own perspective and expertise? Are you all consulted on criminal justice reform and also on the monitoring of the criminal justice system? How does the state interact with civil society organizations who are paying attention to these issues? Thank you very much. Civil society, you have, I think, about 20 minutes. Yeah.
Can I give you a couple of answers? Thank you for these lots of questions. I think it helps us also to see that there is an interest for your side. We also regret not to have the Jamaican government with us today to open a dialogue, because dialogue is a key. This also, I want to be very frank. For example, we are investing quite an amount of funds that we receive from the European Union and other agencies. And we are considered extremely welcome as donors, but we are not considered extremely welcome as partners. I don't know if you understand what I want to say. A donor is okay because it is investing where DCS has not received the big funds from the government. Funds are not considered a front burner matter. But when we want to discuss about policies and implementation, rehabilitation, etc., the situation is not as friendly as it is. If I can give the good news, the Bureau of Standards of Jamaica has formed a committee where I'm sitting to review the standards and procedures for PCS. Some changes are going to be made. I make sure that I am part of this committee together with Desia, Leslie, which is one of the other panelists. We hope that the outcomes can bring some difference. Let me give some answers, and then I will ask my directors to give you the other ones. One, very easy. It is a rule of law that somebody which has been incarcerated cannot be employed by a government agency. I love examples. Some months ago, one ex-inmate was working as clerk at the Supreme Court, while one of the judges recognized him as somebody which he was meeting at trial, and as pretended that the gentleman was fired right away. So it's rule of law. And it's something that we are keeping asking as a major change, because to change the mentality, government should set an example. We are working quite easily with civil society where we can try to find opportunity. But with private sector and the government, most of the times is a no, no answer. Number two, which I want to talk about, is pre-detention. Today we were not supposed to mention too much what is a malpractice in Jamaica. Pre-detention is a drama. It's a drama not only in the prison, but also in the lockup. There is an INDECOM report which has been produced the day before yesterday, if I'm not wrong. And we are talking about the lockups and what's happening there. And there is a second problem, which is additional, which is the state of emergency, which is something that the last couple of years has been used extensively. Those two situations signal a breach of the basic rights when people are detained in a lockup up to 100 days without any charge. Especially when there is a state of emergency, which is justifying the possibility for police and army to apprehend people because there is a curfew, so they are not supposed to be going around, or because they are carrying on an operation. People are detained and they are in the lockup. We went to Montego Bay lockup with the public defender to discover that there were people detained since 180 days without a charge, which was translated in the fact that he lost a job and he also lost his reputation in the community. So the pre-detention is a constant extended problem. Major cause is the poor public service. Somebody was asking if there is a free agency or a free attorney firm or something arranged by the Ministry of Justice. There is one, but it is not particularly efficient. And we have hundreds of complaints about inmates which let us know they don't know where the trial is. They do not bring to court on their trial day because there is no vehicle. They forgot their folders somewhere, and the attorneys, unless they're paid, are not that efficient. Allow me to say that we have some attorneys working with us, and we had a long process to discuss what to do in case somebody wants to appeal. The final decision is not to appeal if the sentence is short, because the slow motion of the courthouses for a sentence which maybe 2 years risk for them to become a detention up to 3, 4, 5 years, which means it's longer than the sentence they have received. So the final decision actually in this moment is if the sentence comes, appeal is considered. If the sentence is short, it is much wiser to avoid to appeal unless you want to stay, you want to be detained longer. Pre-detention, again, is something which is happening because there is a permanent breach of rights. Nobody should be in a lockup for more than 48 hours. Nobody should be in pre-detention waiting for a trial for a year, not more than a year. We had 2 cases in the last 6 months of somebody which has, one was stealing a bicycle and another one was also stealing some food. And they are still detained after 11 months without reaching the courthouse, without being entitled to go to trial. So it is something which is extremely negative for more than one reason. One, the individual rights of the person, which is the right of liberty. Secondly, because in a situation of overcrowding, that we have in most of the institutions, those people, the individual rights of the person, which is the right of liberty, is being violated. So it is something which is extremely negative for more than one reason. One, the individual rights of the person, which is the right of liberty. Secondly, because in a situation of overcrowding that we have in most of the institutions, those people are contributing to the increase of numbers, and there would be no reason at all for them to be there. So, and also there is no form of difference between those which have been sentenced and where they are located and those which are waiting. So the last risk is that somebody which is very young or has committed a very small offense will be in direct contact with people which have been responsible for multiple crimes, or even worse, with people which are detained because they were part of a gang or leading a gang, because it's going to affect their life directly and might also be an invitation for them to join them. So that is really something which needs to be considered. And I'm also asking officially, if it's possible, to add lockup and the state of emergency, which has allowed special power, and therefore they are locked up forever, no possibility to be detained, no reason to be detained because there are no charges towards them. So I would love now for Danielle and Daisy to add their comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Carlo, for that intervention. Thanks, President Clark and the commissioners for all the questions. I will tackle the first question I will tackle is that related to the approach to rehabilitation. So the DCS uses the risk needs responsivity model. And basically what this model does, it focuses on addressing the individual risk factors, needs, and responsivity factors to enhance the effectiveness of rehabilitation. However, one of the key issues highlighted over the years by the Auditor General was that the very basic need to assess everybody coming into the care of the DCS was not being met, because according to an audit report, not everybody was being assessed. And of course, this is the very basis on which the risk needs responsivity model works. But the DCS does have its instruments. So yes, so the approach to rehabilitation is R&R. It might not be implemented in the same way that it's implemented in the Western world because of resource challenges, but on paper, it's the R&R model that is being used. In terms of what the government is doing to address issues related to pre-trial detention, you would have heard Carla speak about the Bureau of Standards Jamaica creating correctional standards, minimum standards for the treatment of persons committed to the care of the DCS. So that's one that's been led by the government with stakeholder input. And that's one of the ways we are able to put forward our positions and evidence in support of, reform, penal reform. But generally speaking, the government has been trying to strengthen the legislative framework. And so currently the Parole Amendment Act and the Correctional Act, they're under review. And so that is something that would, probably take into account a number of things, including there has been discussions about the question of whether rehabilitation should be mandatory, because one report found that only 21% of adults were participating in available rehabilitation programs. So strengthening the legislative framework is one of the ways the government is trying to address a number of the issues we highlighted today. In terms of, you would have heard Daniel speak about record management. that's a big issue, but and of course it affects the effectiveness of monitoring and evaluating the sector or the department or the service itself. But one of the things the government has been trying to do in collaboration with international partners is to digitize the record management system. So moving away from the largely paper-based systems. And that in itself could address a number of things related to files being misplaced or lost. So that's one of the ways the government is actually also trying to address issues related to the length of pre-trial detention. But of course, there is a child diversion program in place that seems to have a lot of promise. So whilst the figures are large in terms of remand, and a lot of these figures would have been as a result of the court backlog, which the president alluded to, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic. The child diversion program is actually showing a lot of promise in diverting a number of children away from the criminal justice system. Now, there was a question of, I think one of the commissioners requested the sharing of data. Yeah, I'm happy, we're happy to share with you any available reports we have. Just to say that the Economic and Social Survey of Jamaica is one of Jamaica's main national performance reports, and there's an entire section in there on the DCS. Unfortunately, that section was missing from last year's reports. But if you want to do any trend analysis, the Economic and Social Survey of Jamaica is certainly a good source for that kind of information. But also, we should be able to share the Inter-American Development Bank survey of persons deprived of liberty. It's actually free online. And then there was a question of whether what is the socio-demographic profile of children in custody. Given the data available to us, we know for sure that in 2021, majority were admitted for uncontrollable behavior and disorderly conduct, 23% to be exact. Following that, it would be for breaking and larceny related convictions. Majority are male. In terms of age, I believe the president asked about the age, majority were 16. Again, when we share any available data, you can have a more in-depth breakdown or disaggregation of this kind of information. Then the question was raised as to who defines uncontrollable behavior. So I am aware that the Child Care and Protection Act is also under review, but Section 24 of the Act gives the family court the power to make a correctional order for a child brought before the court by a parent or guardian who feels that the child suffers from uncontrollable behavior. So it's actually defined, the Child Care and Protection Act actually uses a terminology, but of course, this is a terminology that has gone through a number of discussions, and the idea is to move away from using that terminology because of it stigmatizes children who just simply, they haven't committed an offense or anything, they haven't broken the law in any case. They're only displaying behavioral challenges, which has nothing to do with violating the law, and then they're thrown into this process of being labeled uncontrollable. And so this is one of the things that we think we definitely need to the address. But generally speaking, parent can bring the child to the children's court if they're unable to control them. And according to Section 24 of the Child Care and Protection Act, the court has, can, issue an order, a correctional order, anything, a probation order, anything following that. Yeah, I think those were the few questions that, jumped out at me. Daniel, I don't know if you also have an intervention.
Hello. So I didn't hear some of what you said this year, but I would assume that you spoke about the matters on the that you're familiar with dealing with childcare and pretrial detention. The only thing I would just add to what was said, there was a question about whether or not or what is the extent of legal representation or support for inmates, especially those who are detained. So Jamaica does have a Legal Aid Act, and we have a Legal Aid Council, so persons are able to obtain legal representation through this legal aid system. However, I will say that it's really incumbent upon family members or relatives of those who are detained to seek out, in many cases, support through the legal aid. In some cases, the court can require legal aid and representation for persons, but it's one of the areas that I think is very underserved. It's over or under resourced. You don't have enough lawyers through the legal aid system to provide the support that is needed for those who have been detained. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I want to thank Maria Carla Gulota, Dacia Leslie, and Danielle Andrade for your expertise, your statistics, and your participation in this session. I think one of you may have asked in your presentation about the Inter-American standards on pretrial detention, but within the Inter-American system, the only legitimate grounds for pretrial detention are twofold. One, where there's a risk that the person charged will evade justice, and secondly, the accused will attempt to obstruct the criminal investigation itself. So it's quite, pretrial detention is meant to be an exceptional approach, not the first resort and not the norm. So just to let you know, that's from the Inter-American point of view. I also thank you for giving some information on the government's, the state's ongoing efforts to strengthen the legislative framework, in particular the Parole Act, and I think you have a number of recommendations, which I'm sure you have given to the state, on how the parole process can be characterized by fairness and objectivity as far as needed. You've also spoken about the efforts to strengthen the Correction Act as well as the Child Care and Protection Act, and I'm sure that there are many other initiatives of the state to strengthen the justice sector and to respond to those who are most vulnerable and who are incarcerated for any number of reasons. So just to say thank you for your participation. We look forward to any information you can send us, reports and statistics, and we do note your guidance on going to the Economic and Social Survey, the Jamaica Survey, as a source of information for the Commission. I'm sure we will all pay attention to that recommendation. So it's just left for me now to thank everyone for their participation and to bring the hearing to a close. Thank you very much.
If I am allowed to say, thanks you for listening to us. And the proposal is that if you need anything,